The evening was unusually quiet in my house that day. At 72, silence had become both my friend and my enemy. Some days, it comforted me. Other days, it reminded me that my world had grown smaller. My husband was gone. Most of my friends had moved away or passed, and all I really had left was my son's family. I thought I was lucky because my son had promised I would never be alone. He and his wife had insisted that I move closer to them after my health had begun to decline. They said it was for my safety. They said they loved me. But sometimes love disguises itself as something else, something colder, something crueler. That night, I discovered just how thin the mask of family love could be. I had walked into my son's house without knocking, like I often did. They'd given me a spare key after all, and I thought that meant I was welcome. Dinner was still warm on the table, the kind of night where we all usually gathered together. And for once, I was excited to see my granddaughter, Emily. Emily was 16, bright, sharp, and beautiful. She reminded me of myself at her age, only bolder, quicker with her tongue. I had always hoped we'd be close. I knitted her scarves, baked her favorite cookies, and listened to her school stories when no one else had time. But lately, I'd felt her pulling away. Short answers, eye rolls, the kind of distance teenagers put between themselves and anyone who doesn't fit into their fast-moving world. Still, nothing could have prepared me for what I heard that evening. I was about to step into the kitchen when I froze. Their voices carried clearly. Emily's voice, sharp, casual, cruel. Why does Grandma even bother? She's just waiting to die. Honestly, Dad, she's more of a burden than anything else. My heart stopped. At first, I thought I misheard her. Maybe she said something else. Maybe she was joking. But then I heard my son's low sigh. Emily, don't talk like that. She's family, but even his tone wasn't firm. It wasn't angry. It was tired, resigned. Emily laughed. Family or not, she's old. She just sits there and complains. You're paying for her meds, her food, everything. What's the point? I mean, come on. She won't last long anyway. I felt like the ground had been pulled from under me. Every word sliced through me like a knife. I leaned against the wall, clutching at my chest, struggling to breathe. My granddaughter, the child I cradled when she was born, the girl I prayed for every night, thought I was nothing but dead weight. And my son, my only son, didn't even defend me. My mind flashed with memories, holding his hand on his first day of school, working 2 jobs just to make sure he had shoes without holes, skipping meals so he could eat, supporting him through college, helping him buy his first car, even taking care of Emily when she was little so he and his wife could work late. And now, I was a burden. The tears came before I could stop them. Silent at first, then harder. But I pressed my sleeve to my face, swallowing my sobs. They couldn't know I was there. Not yet. I stepped back into the hallway, careful not to make a sound. My legs trembled as I moved toward the door. I wanted to scream, to confront them right then and there. But something inside me whispered, wait, wait. Because anger could only go so far. Wait, because if they already saw me as useless, I couldn't give them the satisfaction of breaking down in front of them. Wait, because I had a secret they didn't know about. And maybe, just maybe, it was time they learned. As I sat in my own house later that night, their words replayed in my head over and over like poison. Emily's voice, she won't last long anyway. My son's tired reply, Emily, don't talk like that. But not once did he say, don't disrespect my mother. Not once did he stand up for me. The betrayal burned. I stood in front of the mirror that night, staring at the woman looking back at me. Wrinkled face, tired eyes, hair graying more than I liked to admit. Yes, I was old. Yes, my body was failing in ways I couldn't always control, but I was not weak, and I was far from helpless. They didn't know the full story of my life. They didn't know what I had hidden. They didn't know the power I still held, quietly, secretly. As I wiped my tears, something inside me hardened. If my own flesh and blood thought I was just waiting to die, then it was time to remind them who I truly was. And when I finally revealed it, when they finally saw what I had been keeping from them, nothing would ever be the same again. Sleep didn't come easily after I heard Emily's cruel words. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with memories I tried to bury. Her voice echoed in my head, slicing into me. She's just waiting to die. It was strange how one sentence could dig up decades of buried struggles, sacrifices, and scars. It wasn't just about Emily. It was about my whole life, every piece of me that had been dismissed, undervalued, or forgotten. And now, it was time I faced it all again. I wasn't born into wealth or privilege. My parents worked the cotton fields of Alabama, sweating under the relentless sun, scraping by with what little they had. From the time I could walk, I was put to work, hauling water, cleaning, doing chores most children never imagined. But I wasn't bitter then. I was strong, determined. At 17, I married Robert, a kind man with a wide smile and dreams bigger than the world. We didn't have much, but we had each other. He worked in construction, I worked as a cleaner, and together we built a life brick by brick. Then came Michael, my only son, the center of my universe. But life doesn't hand out blessings without burdens. Robert was killed in a work accident when Michael was just 9. One moment, I was a wife. The next, I was a widow, standing at a graveside holding my child's trembling hand, wondering how I'd ever keep us afloat. I did what I had to. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I took on shifts scrubbing office floors at night and ironing clothes for rich families during the day. My hands cracked from chemicals, my knees ached, but I never once let my boy go hungry. Michael was everything, and for him, I endured. The years were not kind. Family members who had promised to help out quickly disappeared when they saw how much responsibility it took. My own sister, Clara, once sneered at me during a family gathering. "You always act like a martyr, but no one forced you to marry young. Maybe if you'd been smarter, you wouldn't be struggling." Her words stung, but I swallowed them down. Clara had married into money and never lifted a finger in her life. She couldn't understand sacrifice if it stared her in the face. At work, I faced humiliation too. People looked down on me for being just a cleaner. I remember overhearing a secretary once whisper, "Poor thing. Bet she'll die scrubbing floors." They didn't know the fire inside me. They didn't know I kept going because of my son. Michael grew up watching me fight for survival. I thought he understood. I thought he valued it. When he graduated college, the first in our family to do so, I felt like every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every bruise on my hands had been worth it. But somewhere along the way, Michael changed. He married young too. His wife, Lillian, was charming at first, beautiful, ambitious, full of promises about building a strong family together. But I noticed the cracks early. The way she looked at me with polite disdain. The way she flinched when I offered advice. The way she insisted Michael needed space from me once they moved into their first home. I ignored it. For Michael's sake, I smiled. I babysat Emily when she was born, rocking her to sleep while Lillian went back to work. I cooked meals, folded laundry, and filled their house with warmth. But as Emily grew, so did the distance. Money, or rather, the lack of it, was always a shadow over us. I never told Michael everything, but after Robert's death, I learned to save every penny. I built small investments, bought a little property in my name, and tucked away money where no one could touch it. It wasn't much at first, but I was careful, patient, wise, and slowly, quietly, I became something no one suspected, financially secure. Yet I never flaunted it. I wanted Michael and Emily to see me as their mother and grandmother, not as a bank account. But sometimes I caught Lillian's eyes lingering when I wrote a check or handed Michael a little extra for bills. Sometimes I caught Emily snooping in my purse, pretending to look for gum. There were whispers, too, conversations that stopped when I walked into the room, a tension I couldn't name.
I wasn't entirely alone in life. My neighbor, Martha, was my closest friend. A widow herself, she knew the sting of loneliness, the way children grow distant no matter how much you give. One afternoon, as we sipped tea on her porch, I confessed, "Sometimes I feel like they're just waiting for me to disappear." Martha's eyes softened. "Child, you've given your family everything, but don't you forget, you've still got more power than they realize. Don't let them write your ending before it's time." Her words stayed with me. There was also Pastor James, a man who had guided me through Robert's death and every storm since. He once told me, "God gives us strength, but he also gives us wisdom. Sometimes keeping quiet is strength, and sometimes speaking truth shakes the earth." I wasn't sure which path was mine yet. After Emily's cruel words, I began to watch more closely. I noticed how Lillian controlled conversations, how Michael deferred to her. I noticed how Emily rolled her eyes when I spoke, as if I were invisible. And then came the small things. Objects in my home slightly moved, papers shifted from where I'd left them. One evening, I found my locked drawer tampered with. I didn't mention it, not yet, but I knew. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were looking for something I had hidden. 1 week after overhearing Emily's words, I walked into my living room and froze. Michael was sitting at my desk. He didn't hear me at first. His back was to me. But I saw the papers spread out in front of him. My bank statements, my property deeds, the documentation of everything I had, carefully kept secret for decades. My son, my only son, digging through my life as if it already belonged to him. I whispered his name, and he jumped. The guilt in his eyes told me everything. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about Emily's careless cruelty. This was bigger, darker, and it was only the beginning. The night I caught Michael rifling through my desk, something inside me snapped. For years, I had swallowed disrespect, overlooked slights, and forced myself to smile through loneliness. But seeing my own son digging through the evidence of my sacrifices, it was a betrayal I couldn't ignore. I stood there in silence, letting him squirm in the weight of my stare. "Mom," he stammered, shoving the papers into a messy pile. I was just looking for something. I didn't mean, looking for what? My voice came out sharper than I expected. For proof that I'm still alive, or for what you think you're owed after I'm gone. Michael's face flushed. He looked like the little boy I once scolded for stealing cookies, only now the stakes were immeasurably higher. Lillian appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed, lips pressed into that familiar thin line. "Don't be dramatic, Margaret." He wasn't doing anything wrong. I turned slowly toward her, fury simmering. "Do you think I'm blind? Or just too old to notice when my son goes through my private things?" Emily hovered behind her mother, her phone in hand, clearly recording. "Grandma, calm down. You're always so paranoid. Maybe if you trusted people, you wouldn't feel so." paranoid, I snapped. Child, I've trusted more than you'll ever know, and it's that trust that's been abused. The air in the room was thick with tension. My family, my own flesh and blood, looked at me not with love, but with calculation. Michael tried to recover his composure. Mom, listen, we're just concerned. You've been acting strange, forgetting things, misplacing things. Lillian thought maybe you weren't managing well. I let out a bitter laugh. So your solution is to dig through my desk, to count my money, to see what you'll get once I'm gone. Lillian stepped forward, her voice dripping with false sweetness. It's not about that. It's about making sure you're safe. Maybe it's time you consider, moving into assisted living. Somewhere where professionals can help. Assisted living, I repeated, my chest tightening. So you can sell this house the moment my back is turned. So you can cash in on everything your father and I built with our bare hands. Michael opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. Don't you dare lie to me, Michael. I saw the listings, my house, my home, already marked for sale online. Tell me, when were you planning to let me know? The room fell silent. Emily shifted uncomfortably. Michael avoided my gaze. Lillian, bold as ever, lifted her chin. You were never going to use all that money. You hoarded it while we struggled. Do you know how much debt we've had? Do you know how much college costs? You sit on resources while your own family suffers. I felt the sting, but I didn't flinch. Suffers? Do you know what suffering is, Lillian? Suffering is scrubbing toilets at midnight so your child can eat. Suffering is burying the love of your life and still waking up to fight another day. Suffering is wearing holes in your shoes so your son can have new ones. My voice cracked, but I pushed through. Don't you dare tell me I don't know suffering. For the first time, Lillian's confidence wavered. But it wasn't just about money. They thought I was a week-old woman, hoarding scraps. They had no idea. Michael, I said softly, do you know why I worked so hard all those years? Why I kept secrets even from you? He looked at me warily. Because you're stubborn. I shook my head. Because I was protecting you. Lillian scoffed, but I ignored her. There's more to me than you realize, I continued. When Robert died, I didn't just scrape by. I invested. I learned, quietly, patiently. While the world dismissed me, I built something lasting. Michael frowned. What are you saying? I straightened my spine, letting the truth sink in. I'm not just sitting on a savings account. I own property, stocks, assets you can't even imagine. This house isn't the only one in my name, Emily gasped, lowering her phone. Wait, what? Lillian's eyes gleamed with greed, but I saw the flicker of disbelief. I wasn't about to let this conversation die in the privacy of my living room. No, if they wanted to corner me, I would shine the brightest light on their betrayal. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A week later, the family gathered at Pastor James's church for a community potluck. Neighbors, friends, and fellow parishioners filled the hall. It was the perfect stage. As plates clattered and conversations buzzed, I stood and cleared my throat. The room quieted, eyes turning to me. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Lillian gripped his arm. I have something to say, I began, my voice steady. For too long, I've been treated as if I were already gone. As if my worth ended the day I grew old. But tonight, I will not be silenced. Murmurs rippled through the room. I turned to face my family. Michael, Lillian, Emily, you think I'm helpless? That I'm just waiting to die? Well, let everyone here know the truth. You were ready to sell my house before I even left it. You went through my private papers. You treated me like a burden instead of a mother. Gasps filled the air. Michael shot up, his face red. That's not true. It is true, I interrupted, pulling the bank statements from my bag. I found him at my desk. And if you think I'm lying, here's proof he accessed my accounts. I slapped the documents on the table. The crowd leaned in, whispers growing louder. Lillian stood, her voice shrill. She's twisting everything. She's confused. She's making up stories. Can't you see? This is elder paranoia. Pastor James raised a hand. I've known Margaret for decades. She's not paranoid. And if she says you went through her things, I believe her. Martha chimed in from the crowd, her voice fierce. I've seen the way you treat her. Shame on you. After everything she's done for this town, for her family, you call her a burden. Emily's face turned pale as the whispers around her grew sharper. People she respected were looking at her with disgust. I let the silence stretch before dropping the final revelation. You see, I didn't tell anyone because I wanted my son to live his life without worrying. But the truth is, I'm not just a poor old widow. I've been building wealth for decades, quietly. I own not one, but 4 houses. I hold investments worth more than you'll ever guess. I could have helped. I wanted to help, but you made a mistake. Michael's jaw dropped. Emily's phone slipped from her hand. Lillian looked like she'd been slapped. I leaned forward, my voice cold as steel. The mistake was thinking I was weak. The mistake was treating me like I was disposable. Gasps echoed through the room again, but then I dropped the final bombshell. My will, my estate, everything I own, is already signed over. And not to you, the room erupted. Michael stumbled back into his chair, his face drained of color. What? What do you mean? I looked him dead in the eye. You'll find out soon enough. Just know this. I am not helpless. And I am not waiting to die. I am living. And I will decide who deserves my legacy. The church hall was still buzzing from the revelation I had dropped. My words hadn't just unsettled my family, they had shaken the entire room. Neighbors, friends, and even strangers I had known only in passing now stared at Michael, Lillian, and Emily as though they were strangers themselves, but this was only the beginning. I could see the sweat on Michael's brow, the trembling in Emily's hands, the fire in Lillian's eyes. They thought they could gaslight me, twist the narrative, make me look senile. Not tonight. Pastor James, who had been silent, finally spoke. His voice carried authority, filling every corner of the hall. Margaret has been a cornerstone of this community. I've seen her give when she had nothing to spare, and I've seen how some of you, he glanced sharply at my family, have repaid her with greed. Gasps spread through the room. Whispers rose like a wave. Martha, my old neighbor, shook her head in disgust. How could you? After all she's done. She watched your kids, cooked for you, gave to every fundraiser. And this is how you treat her? Michael raised his hands desperately. No, that's not fair. We were just worried about her health. She's not remembering things right, but his words fell flat. The people who once respected him now looked at him as if he were a stranger. I had anticipated this denial. That's why I had prepared more than just words. From my bag, I pulled a thick manila envelope and laid it on the table in front of me. The rustle of paper was enough to silence the entire hall. These, I said, my voice steady, are legal documents, proof of ownership, records of investments, copies of my will, every page signed, dated, notarized. I flipped one page toward the crowd. Do you see this signature? It's not new. I changed my estate years ago, and I left nothing to those who would betray me. Lillian's face drained of color. You You can't do that. We're your family. I turned to her sharply. Family isn't determined by blood alone. Family is loyalty, respect, love. Tell me, Lillian, when was the last time you showed me any of those? The hall erupted in murmurs of agreement. The tension was unbearable. Emily, always so confident with her phone in hand, looked around at the dozens of judgmental eyes now piercing her. She's lying, Emily cried out, her voice cracking. She's trying to make us look bad. But then, to my surprise, another voice cut through the room. It was Karen, Emily's college friend, standing near the back. No, Emily. She's not lying. I've heard you. I've seen the way you talk about her. You laughed and called her a burden more times than I can count. You told us you couldn't wait for her to be gone. The crowd gasped again. Emily's face turned crimson. Her phone slipped from her trembling hands and clattered to the floor. The humiliation was complete. Just when the whispers began to die down, the doors to the hall swung open. 2 officers stepped in. The room went silent again. Michael stiffened. Lillian clutched his arm. Mrs. Margaret Reynolds, one officer asked, approaching me respectfully. Yes, I said calmly. We received your report earlier this week regarding suspected financial exploitation. We've completed our initial review, and based on the evidence you submitted, he glanced at Michael and Lillian, we need to ask a few questions, privately, if you'd like. Or here I smiled faintly. Here is fine. Everyone deserves to know the truth. Gasps filled the air again as the officers unfolded papers. We've confirmed attempts to access Mrs. Reynolds' accounts without authorization. We also discovered property listings placed online under false pretenses. The evidence leads back to Mr. Michael Reynolds and Mrs. Lillian Reynolds. Michael's knees nearly buckled. Lillian clutched his arm tighter, her nails digging into his skin. The reaction was swift and merciless. Martha stepped forward, glaring at Michael. You disgust me. Your father would be ashamed. Pastor James shook his head gravely. This is beyond disappointment. This is sin. Even Emily's friends turned away from her, whispering, disgust clear on their faces. Emily, once the darling of every social circle, now stood isolated, exposed. I let the silence hang heavy before speaking again. You see, I didn't just prepare legally. I prepared socially. For years, I stayed quiet. But now everyone knows who you truly are. The officers turned to Michael. Sir, we need you to come with us to answer some questions. Michael stammered. Wait, this is a mistake. I was just trying to help my mother. But even as he protested, the officers guided him firmly toward the exit. Lillian tried to follow, but I raised my voice. Lillian Reynolds. She froze, glaring at me with venom in her eyes. I may be old, but I am not weak. And you will never again control what is mine. You wanted my house, my money, my legacy. You will get none of it. The hall erupted into applause. Lillian's face burned red as she turned and stormed out, dragging Emily behind her. The tension slowly lifted as the family left the hall in disgrace. Neighbors approached me, some with tears in their eyes, others with words of encouragement. Pastor James rested a hand on my shoulder. Margaret, you've endured more than anyone should. But tonight, you reminded us all of something important. Strength doesn't fade with age. I nodded, my chest heavy but relieved. Thank you, Pastor. Tonight wasn't just about me. It was about every elder who's been silenced, dismissed, or betrayed. We all deserve dignity. As the crowd began to disperse, Martha leaned close and whispered, You said you already signed everything over. But to who? I smiled faintly, keeping my answer to myself. That, I said softly, is for part of the story still to come. Her eyes widened, curiosity burning. The secret lingered, unanswered, and as I left the hall, walking slowly but steadily into the cool night air, I knew one thing for certain. My family thought they had buried me in silence, but tonight I had risen louder than ever. It had been 6 months since that unforgettable night in the church hall, the night my own flesh and blood were exposed in front of everyone. For weeks after, the story spread through town like wildfire. Neighbors whispered, friends shook their heads in disbelief, and people I barely knew approached me in the grocery store just to say, "We're proud of you for standing up for yourself." And yet, when the dust settled, I was left with silence, a silence both heavy and healing. Michael had been forced to answer to the law. He spent months under investigation for financial exploitation, and while prison time wasn't given, thanks to my decision not to push for it, he paid in another way. The community's trust in him evaporated. His business, once steady, lost clients. His reputation never recovered. Lillian withdrew completely. Bitter and humiliated, she no longer attended community events, no longer smiled politely at neighbors in the street. She and Michael lived in the shadow of their choices, unable to escape the weight of what they had done. And Emily, my granddaughter, was left to pick up the pieces of her broken image. One chilly morning, as golden leaves fell from the trees, I sat in my garden sipping tea. The crunch of footsteps startled me, and when I looked up, I saw Emily standing at the gate. Her head was lowered, her hands fidgeting nervously. She looked nothing like the arrogant, sharp-tongued young woman from months ago. Instead, she looked like a child lost in her own mistakes. "Grandma," she said softly, barely audible. For a long time, I said nothing. I let the silence stretch between us, not as punishment, but as truth. She had wounded me deeply, words sharper than any knife, but now here she stood, seeking something she couldn't yet name. Finally, I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit." She sat, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry. For everything. For what I said. For how I acted. I didn't mean it, not the way it sounded. I was stupid, cruel, and I thought you'd never hear me." Her voice broke. I studied her face. Behind the guilt, I saw a flicker of sincerity. It didn't erase the pain, but it softened the sharpness of it. "You hurt me, Emily," I said plainly. "Your words cut deeper than you'll ever know, but you're here now, and that means something." She nodded quickly, tears spilling over. "I want to do better. I want to change." For the first time, I reached across the table and touched her hand. It was trembling. "Then prove it. Not to me, but to yourself." In the months that followed, Emily began showing up, not with grand gestures, not with rehearsed apologies, but with quiet consistency. She helped me with groceries. She mowed the lawn. She even came over one evening with a notebook saying, "Grandma, can you tell me your recipes? I don't want them to be lost." Slowly, I saw transformation in her. Not perfection, but growth. And though I forgave her, I did not forget. Forgiveness is not erasure. It is a choice to move forward without letting the past chain you. My life, too, took a different shape. For years, I had been told I was just waiting to die, as if my life's value was behind me. But in truth, those months became some of the richest of my life. I started a small group for elders at church, a place where people could share stories of betrayal, resilience, and hope. To my surprise, it grew quickly. Dozens came, many of them carrying scars just like mine, children who ignored them, families who used them, voices that had been silenced. We weren't just surviving, we were reclaiming. One afternoon, Pastor James smiled at me and said, "Margaret, do you realize what you've done? You've turned your pain into purpose." And he was right. As for Michael and Lillian, they never came to me again. Pride kept them away, and shame sealed the distance. At first, that hurt, because no matter how much betrayal cuts, a mother's heart still longs for her son. But as the seasons passed, I realized something important. Love does not mean enabling. Sometimes, the strongest act of love is to let someone face the consequences of their actions. I prayed for them, but I did not chase after them. That chapter was closed. 1 year later, Emily made a bold decision. She stood before our church, trembling, and shared her story publicly. I said something cruel about my grandmother, something I can never take back. But instead of cutting me off, she gave me a chance to grow. I want to say to every young person here, respect your elders, listen to them, because once they're gone, you'll never get another chance. The hall was silent, moved. Tears filled my eyes as I listened. Not because her words erased the pain, but because they proved that even broken hearts can heal. One day, Martha, my old neighbor, asked me again the question she had whispered on that fateful night. "You said you changed your estate, but you never told us to who." I smiled. The truth was simple, yet profound. I had signed it all over to a scholarship fund for local students, young people who couldn't afford college, but had the heart and determination to try. My family thought I was a treasure chest waiting to be opened, but I was a wellspring pouring into the future. And that, I realized, was my final answer to betrayal, turning what they tried to steal into something that could never be stolen. Looking back, I see this clearly. Aging is not the end. It is a different chapter. And in that chapter, your worth does not diminish. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Don't let anyone convince you that your voice doesn't matter. Don't let betrayal silence you. Stand firm, protect your dignity, and remember, sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living with strength and grace. Family may betray you, friends may abandon you, but your worth, that never fades. As I sit now, years later, watching Emily help an elderly neighbor carry groceries, I smile to myself. The pain of betrayal hasn't vanished, but it has been transformed. From brokenness came strength, from shame came wisdom, and from the cruel words, "She's just waiting to die," came a life renewed, louder, stronger, and more purposeful than before. But I leave you with one question. If you were in my place, what would you do? Hold on to anger or turn it into something greater?